But what if the people we fear the most are also the least qualified to lead us? Have you ever looked around and thought, how is that person in charge? It's a question more common than you'd think, and more disturbing when you realize it's not just an accident. From ancient emperors to modern CEOs, history is filled with examples of incompetent people rising to the top, while truly capable individuals remain in the background, unheard and unseen. It's a phenomenon so widespread, it can't be a coincidence. Take Nero, who watched Rome burn while playing music, or Elizabeth Holmes, who built a multi-billion-dollar company on nothing but smoke and mirrors. These are not isolated events. They're symptoms of a deeper problem. We expect leadership to be a reward for competence, but again and again, it turns out to be a reward for perception, audacity, and sometimes outright deception. This pattern forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Is the system broken, or is this exactly how it's designed to function? Are we selecting leaders based on actual merit, or are we simply choosing those who can manipulate the system better than anyone else? What if the rise of the incompetent isn't an error but a feature? Today we're diving deep into this paradox, and the answer might change how you see leadership, power, and success forever. Because once you understand the dark mechanics behind influence, you'll start seeing these patterns everywhere. And more importantly, you'll learn how to avoid falling for them again. Niccolo Machiavelli wasn't writing about politics as it should be. He was writing about power as it really is, raw, ruthless, and often horrifying. Exiled from Florence in the 16th century, he wrote The Prince, not as a fantasy of ideal government, but as a field manual for survival in a world where ethics and truth rarely win. He wanted to expose the dark strategies rulers used, and still use, to gain and hold power. Machiavelli saw that leaders who were too virtuous, too honest, or too thoughtful often fell to those who played dirtier faster. In his world, and arguably ours, morality is often seen as a liability, not a strength. And this brutal realism still echoes today in boardrooms, politics, and global leadership battles. When he said, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are," he revealed one of power's cruelest truths. Image beats integrity. Surface-level charm beats substance. For it's not about what's true, it's about what people believe is true. And that shift in values creates dangerous consequences. Understanding Machiavelli doesn't mean becoming immoral. It means learning how the game is played so you're not played by it. Because if you're still acting as if the world rewards goodness alone, you might be walking straight into a trap set by those who've already read The Prince and applied it. We like to think we value intelligence, but in the real world, looking smart is often more valuable than being smart, and nowhere is that clearer than in the realm of power. You don't need deep insight to rise. You need confidence, performance, and the right audience. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He watched rulers rise not because they were wise, but because they knew how to manipulate perception. In today's world, it's even worse. We're surrounded by influencers, executives, and politicians who master the art of sounding right while saying nothing at all. Their certainty is their greatest weapon and our biggest blind spot. Meanwhile, truly intelligent people often hesitate. They question themselves. They see nuance where others see simplicity. And in a system that rewards boldness over thoughtfulness, that's a fatal flaw. As Machiavelli warned, showing your full intelligence may provoke fear, jealousy, or resistance from those who feel threatened. So what wins in the end, truth or theater? Sadly, it's often the latter, and unless you learn to recognize this, you'll keep wondering why you were passed over for someone louder, less informed, but far more convincing. There's a disturbing truth buried in leadership science: intelligence only helps up to a certain point. A controversial 2017 study found that IQ correlates positively with leadership effectiveness, but only until about 120. After that, additional intelligence actually hurts your chances of leading others. Why? Because exceptionally smart individuals struggle to communicate in simple, digestible ways. Their ideas are too layered. Their self-awareness makes them question themselves. Their ethics make them hesitate. Meanwhile, their competition is already shouting bold solutions, simple, certain, and wrong, but loud. This mismatch creates a perverse reality. In a world craving certainty, subtlety is at disadvantage. Intelligence comes with hesitation, while power demands conviction. That tension can turn brilliance into a barrier. The very qualities that make someone wise can also make them unelectable, unpromotable, invisible. So the next time you hear someone oversimplifying a complex issue with unshakable confidence, remember this: they may be rewarded for their clarity, but that clarity could be a mask for shallow thinking, and the person quietly analyzing in the corner. They may hold the truth, but no one's listening. If intelligence truly led to influence, Socrates would have ruled Athens. Instead, they made him drink poison. Why? Because he questioned everything, admitted his ignorance, and demanded that others do the same. But people don't want complex questions. They want simple answers. And simple answers are exactly what populist leaders throughout history have offered. They don't challenge beliefs, they reinforce them. They don't sow doubt, and they project certainty. And in an uncertain world, that certainty is addictive. People will choose confidentlies over thoughtful truths again and again. This isn't just ancient history. It's happening today. Leaders rise to power not because they know more, but because they claim to know everything. And while thinkers like Socrates ask the hard questions, their voices are drowned out by those who promise the impossible. The lesson is clear. In the battle between nuance and noise, noise often wins. But understanding why it wins gives you an edge and a warning. Because if you don't recognize this pattern, you might keep trusting the wrong voices and silencing the ones that actually matter. Being intelligent isn't just about knowing more, it's about seeing the complexity in everything. But in a world that rewards simplicity and confidence, that depth can feel like a curse. The overthinker analyzes every angle, anticipates consequences, and questions motives. And while that makes them excellent at solving problems, it makes them terrible at winning crowds. In power dynamics, hesitation looks like weakness, nuance feels like uncertainty, and self-awareness? That's often mistaken for insecurity. So while the overthinker is crafting the most ethical, well-balanced path forward, their competition is already out front, selling a vision, no matter how flawed or fake. This isn't a failure of intelligence. It's a failure of how we perceive leadership. We expect our leaders to project certainty, to move fast, and to speak clearly. But complex realities can't always be simplified into sound bites, and those who try often distort the truth just to seem strong. The tragedy is that overthinkers often disqualify themselves from leadership before others even get the chance. Not because they lack capability, but because the system punishes thoughtful restraint and rewards reckless conviction. What happens when someone who knows almost nothing is absolutely convinced they know everything? Welcome to the Dunning-Kruger effect, a psychological trap where the least competent overestimate themselves the most. And it's not just theory. It's shaping our world right now. Studies show that those with the least knowledge are often the most confident. They don't realize what they don't know, and that ignorance gives them an illusion of superiority. Meanwhile, actual experts constantly question their understanding because they're aware of how complex things truly are. Shakespeare nailed it centuries ago. The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. In modern leadership, this effect creates dangerous outcomes. The loudest voice in the room often wins, not because they're right, but because they think they are. And the rest of us? We mistake confidence for competence. We vote for it. We promote it, we follow it, often into disaster, because we're wired to trust certainty over subtlety, even when it leads us straight off a cliff. In meetings, campaigns, and social media feeds, there's one consistent pattern. The person speaking with the most certainty usually dominates the conversation. And often they don't even need to be correct, just confident. In a world driven by perception, loudness is often mistaken for leadership. This isn't about volume alone. It's about emotional intensity, certainty, and the ability to sound like you have all the answers. It's why charismatic grifters can outshine quiet experts. Why people with strong opinions, even if they're wrong, get promoted, elected, and followed. Our brains are wired for shortcuts. Certainty signals strength. Decisiveness suggests clarity. And when we're faced with ambiguity, we naturally gravitate toward those who make bold claims with no hesitation. It feels safer, more stable, but it's also incredibly misleading. The most dangerous leaders aren't the quiet ones who doubt. They're the loud ones who never do. And unless we learn to separate volume from value, we'll keep mistaking noise for wisdom, again and again. You'd think billion-dollar investments would require airtight ideas and solid logic. But time and again we see visionary talkers with shaky plans raising massive capital and leaving chaos in their wake. How charisma. It's a drug, and the marketplace is addicted. From Adam Newman to Elizabeth Holmes, we've watched business figures charm their way to the top using nothing but slick presentations and ironclad confidence. The tech world especially rewards this. Bold vision, big dreams, and buzzwords over actual functionality. It's not that charisma is inherently bad. It's just dangerously easy to fake. And when investors, voters, or employees are desperate for direction, the person who sounds the most certain often becomes the default leader. It's about the performance of genius, not their reality. And the fallout? Massive. Failed products. Lost billions. Broken trust. But by the time the truth comes out, the charismatic leader has already moved on. Often richer, often unpunished, and sometimes still admired. Because in the charisma game, substance always comes second. Machiavelli once wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." That single line explains one of the darkest strategies in leadership. Weak leaders choose even weaker subordinates to protect their own position. It sounds counterintuitive. Wouldn't you want the best people on your team? Not if you're insecure. Incompetent leaders see capable individuals as threats. So instead of hiring for talent, they hire for loyalty. Not for skill, but for silence. This creates a ripple effect through organizations, governments, and even families. Smart voices get silenced. Honest criticism is punished. And mediocrity becomes the standard. Not because of chance, but by design. A structure built to protect the fragile ego of whoever's in charge. You may have seen this firsthand. Workplaces where questioning anything makes you a problem, or where the boss surrounds themselves with yes men. That's not just poor leadership. It's a power strategy. And one of the most destructive there is. Incompetence isn't always a fluke. Sometimes it's institutionalized. Once a weak leader takes control and surrounds themselves with even weaker allies, the rot spreads. It's not just a bad hire or a misstep. It becomes a culture. A system designed to preserve power by keeping competence out of the room. Machiavelli saw it clearly. Bad rulers often prefer bad advisors. Why? Because competent people ask hard questions. They challenge authority. They shine a light on uncomfortable truths. And that threatens a fragile leadership built on illusion and ego. So instead, loyalty and obedience get rewarded, not skill. Over time, this creates an ecosystem where mediocrity is the norm. Smart people get filtered out. Independent thinkers learn to stay silent, or they leave. Eventually, no one around the leader has the guts or the brains to fix the problems, and the organization spirals. Not because no one could lead better, but because the system won't allow it. The worst part? The people inside often can't even see it happening. They think it's just how things are. But from the outside, the pattern is obvious. The more insecure the leader, the more broken the structure becomes. When the world feels chaotic, we crave one thing above all else: clarity. A clear villain, a simple solution, a promise that everything will be okay. And that craving, that psychological need, is exactly what manipulative leaders exploit. Genuine experts rarely offer clean answers. They speak in probabilities, not certainties. They explain trade-offs, not miracles. And while that honesty is admirable, it often falls flat in a world trained to reward the fastest, simplest explanation, especially in times of crisis. So when someone steps up and says, "I alone can fix this," we listen. Not because it's logical, but because it feels good. Certainty comforts us. Simplicity soothes us, even when it's a lie. And the more complex the problem, the more tempting the simple and dangerous answer becomes. The real threat isn't just misinformation, it's the seductive power of false clarity. Because once we choose comfort over complexity, we've already surrendered the tools we need to think critically and to resist manipulation. Why do lies win? Because they're easier to believe, especially when they're wrapped in hope, certainty, and confidence. The truth? It's messy. It requires work. It demands that we sit with discomfort, question our assumptions, and face the unknown. Most people don't want that. They want answers. And that's where the manipulator thrives. They give us stories that make us feel better. They tell us what we want to hear, not what we need to know. And because those lies offer psychological relief, we embrace them, even when the evidence says we shouldn't. This is why so many leaders succeed not in solving problems, but in reframing them. They turn complex issues into simplistic battles. They offer enemies instead of solutions, and they mask incompetence with conviction. The lie becomes a narrative, and the narrative becomes reality. It's not that people are stupid. It's that we're human. And humans are wired to avoid pain, seek patterns, and follow confident storytellers. That's why fighting lies requires more than facts. It requires storytelling, empathy, and the courage to be unpopular. There's a painful irony in how the world works. The more morally grounded you are, the harder it is to play the game of power. Why? Because ethics create boundaries. They limit what you're willing to do to win. And in a game where others have no such limits, that makes you vulnerable. Machiavelli understood this all too well. He didn't advocate for evil. He just pointed out that those willing to break the rules often beat those trying to play fair. Because while you're weighing consequences and thinking of others, your ruthless rival is already making their next move, without hesitation. History proves it again and again. Julius Caesar crushed more principled opponents. Business leaders who bend ethics often outpace those who play by the book. And in modern politics, the line between strategy and deception is paper thin. The question is, how far are you willing to go? It's not about abandoning your values. It's about knowing the battlefield. Because if you pretend everyone's playing fair while you're the only one following the rules, you're not noble, you're just outmatched. And that misunderstanding can cost you everything. Not every charming leader is dangerous, but some of the most dangerous ones are incredibly charming. Studies have shown that traits associated with psychopathy, like lack of empathy and manipulativeness, are surprisingly common among high-ranking executives and political leaders. What makes it even scarier is that these individuals aren't obviously evil. They're magnetic. They know how to mirror your emotions, make you feel seen and win your trust, all while hiding their true intentions. They exploit your expectations of what a leader should look like and use it to their advantage. In organizational psychology, charm plus cold calculation is a fast track to power. Because while others hesitate, these individuals act. They don't worry about fallout, consequences, or fairness. They focus on winning, and the system, more often than not, rewards them for it. This doesn't mean everyone who rises quickly is psychopathic, but it does mean we need to be more critical about why certain people rise. Are we following them because they are competent and ethical? Or because they tell us what we want to hear and make us feel good while doing it? Some systems aren't just tolerating incompetence. They're built to protect and promote it. In environments where feedback is slow, consequences are unclear, or results are easy to manipulate, real performance doesn't matter. What matters is appearances. And in those systems, the smooth talkers and shortcut takers dominate. Think about politics. Leaders can always blame failures on the previous administration, on global crises, or on vague outside forces. In large corporations, creative accounting can hide disaster for years. And in the media, being engaging often matters more than being accurate. In these spaces, those who know how to perform, not perform well, just perform, rise. Machiavelli warned of this. In places where judgment is based on what can be seen, not what is, deception becomes a strategy. And when the structure rewards style over substance, the system starts filtering out the competent, because they can't compete with the illusion. If you're in a system like this, recognize it for what it is. Don't internalize the failure. Sometimes the problem isn't you, it's the rules of the game you're being asked to play. In leadership, looking the part often counts more than playing the part. We instinctively trust those who dress sharp, speak confidently, and sound like they have a plan. But how often do we check if that plan actually works? In many cases we don't, because style fools us faster than facts. This isn't just about flashy suits or speeches. It's about how we as humans assess trust. We're wired to read body language, tone, and facial expressions long before we analyze content. That makes us vulnerable to people who've mastered the performance of leadership without the substance behind it. It's why someone who talks fast and smiles often can get away with incompetence for years. Meanwhile, a quiet expert with real insight gets ignored because they don't look like a leader. The irony? The person who knows they're not the smartest in the room is usually Theon, who should be in charge. We need to learn how to separate confidence from credibility, because the more we reward appearances, the more we punish authenticity, and that has real consequences for everyone under that leader's influence. Incompetent leaders don't just stumble into power, they know how to keep it. And one of their greatest tools is manipulation. First, they create tribes. They build us versus them narratives that turn critics into enemies and dissent into betrayal. Once they've polarized the room, they control it. Second, they flood the environment with chaos. Constant crises, non-stop headlines, outrage after outrage. It's not incompetence, it's overload. They bury the truth under noise, making it impossible to focus or organize resistance. And while we're distracted, they consolidate power. Third, they gaslight. They rewrite history, contradict themselves openly, and accuse others of the very tactics they use. Over time, truth itself becomes slippery. Doubt spreads. People stop questioning because they don't know what's real anymore. That confusion is the point. Machiavelli would recognize every one of these moves, not because he approved of them, but because he understood them. To fight manipulation, you first have to see it. And the scariest manipulations are the ones we don't even notice happening. In a world full of performance, deception, and psychological games, how do you protect your mind? It starts with intellectual humility, the ability to admit what you don't know. Sounds simple, but it's powerful, because people who admit gaps in their knowledge are harder to manipulate. Next comes media literacy. Not just knowing how to read, but how to read critically, to question sources, detect bias, and spot emotional manipulation. It's like building a mental filter that catches the noise and lets the truth through. Without it, you're vulnerable to anyone with a camera and confidence. Then there's reflection, philosophical reflection, taking time each day to step back from the flood of input and ask, what actually matters? Ancient Stoics did it daily, not to escape the world, but to strengthen their ability to face it with clarity and control. Mental armor isn't about being cynical, it's about being resilient. Because in a system that would manipulation, those who stay grounded in truth, humility, and critical thinking aren't just observers, they're the resistance. So where does that leave us? If the system often rewards the loud, the shallow, and the manipulative, is there any hope for true intelligence to rise? Yes, but only when it's paired with something even rarer, moral courage. Being smart isn't enough. You have to be willing to speak up, to act, to push back even when it costs you. That's the difference between wisdom and power, and between knowledge and change. Intelligence gives you the map. Courage gets you to the destination. We've seen this combo before. Leaders who combine strategic thinking with integrity. Innovators who refuse to cut corners. Activists who outthink and outlast corrupt systems. They're not always celebrated. Often they're attacked, but they make change stick. Machiavelli was right about how dark power can get. But he was also right that power can be earned, not just seized. And when intelligence is guided by moral strength, it becomes more than just an asset. It becomes a weapon against every system built to reward the opposite.